The English language is such a mess. It contains words that derive from French, Greek, Latin, Old Norse. There's been changes to pronunciation, spelling, and grammar. You name it, it's happened to English. So what's the story? Was it ransacked by a bunch of warmongering tribes? Let's take a look at the history of the English language. When Germanic tribes, the Angles, Saxons and Jutes from modern-day Denmark and northern Germany invaded Britain in the 5th century, they pushed out the largely Celtic-speaking peoples into modern-day Wales, Scotland and Ireland. Few Celtic words remain in the English language today. The Angles come from a region called Engel, and their language, Englisk, is where the word English originates. The different dialects spoken by the tribes evolved into what we now know as Old English. In 597, St. Augustine brought Christianity and the words of Latin origin to Saxon England. Many of these words relate to religion and ritual. Other words of Latin origin introduced into this time referred to aspects of daily life. In 878, the Vikings, Danes and Norsemen, invaded. They introduced almost 2,000 new words into Old English. The language of Old Norse has Germanic origins. This made it relatively easy for the new words to be integrated. Pairs of English and Norse words that were synonymous or which had a similar meaning started to appear. Synonyms help express tone and mood and contribute to the richness of the language. While it would be difficult to understand Old English, approximately half of the English words commonly used today have Old English roots. Artistic culture thrived under the Anglo-Saxons. Epic poems telling of heroic journeys and bloody battles were penned. The oldest known English poem, written over 1,000 years ago, is Beowulf, author unknown. It was like the misery felt by an old man who had lived to see his son's body swing on the gallows. He begins to keen and weep for his boy, watching the raven gloat where he hangs. He can be no help. The wisdom of age is worthless to him. Morning after morning, he wakes to remember that his child is gone. He has no interest in living on until another heir is born in the hall, now that his firstborn has entered death's dominion forever. Beowulf was written in Old English, using a version of the runic alphabet. The English alphabet we use today derives from the Latin alphabet, which was first introduced into England by Christian missionaries around the 7th century. Following the Norman invasion, the runic alphabet was used less and less, gradually dying out. In the late 900s, King Alfred the Great pushed back against the Viking invasion. He used the English language to try and build a unified national identity amongst Britons. Any successes he had were short-lived. In 1066, the Duke of Normandy, better known as William the Conqueror, and his men invaded England. The Normans, who spoke an early version of French known as Old French, had a significant cultural and linguistic influence on the British Isles. William became the King of England, bringing nobles across the Channel to establish the new government of the royal court. As he spoke only Old French, this became the language of the court, as well as the business and ruling classes. Political documents, administration, and literary works were written in Old French. The native lower classes continued to speak English, which created a linguistic divide between them and their rulers. The French language was considered refined and more cultured than the vulgar English tongue. Many French words entered the English language, particularly those relating to power and culture. The division between the ruling French and the English peasantry is illustrated by words associated with food and food production. Words for farm animals, for example, are mainly English, because the English worked in the fields. But words for the various meats derived from these animals are of French origin, as the rulers were the ones enjoying the fine dining. For 300 years, English was spoken but rarely written, as it went through a period of great change. The established and standardized Old English writing started to fragment. Germanic plurals like Haus and Hausen shoe and shoein, were replaced by the French plural method of adding an S to the end of the word. Some words we use today, such as children and men, kept the Germanic form of the plural. The French influence also altered the spelling of words containing the qu sound. Increasingly, it was being written as QU for words like quick, queen, and qualm. More synonyms, this time of French origin, were introduced into English. During this period, there was also a general shift to simpler grammar and fixed word order. After 1200, a rift developed between England and France, eventually leading to war. Old English was in favour again, but with many new French words included. Today, this is known as Middle English. In 1399, as the 100 Years' War raged on, King Henry IV was crowned. He was the first king with English as his native language since the Norman conquest. After the war, French was seen as the language of the enemy. A famous text from the period is Chaucer's The Canterbury Tales. Once on a time was dwelling in Oxford a wealthy lout who took in guests to board. And of his craft he was a carpenter. A poor scholar was lodging with him there, who'd learned the arts, but all his fantasy was turned to the study of astrology. Now this was the period of the English Renaissance, Shakespeare and the invention of the printing press. The English language continued to evolve. Towards the end of the Middle English period and into early modern English, there was a distinct change in the way vowels were pronounced. They were becoming shorter and shorter, and this was known as the Great Vowel Shift. The th of some verb forms changed to s. Hath became has, and loveth, loves. Written English was also becoming more familiar to what we know today, but words such as thou, thee, and thine were still in use. Innovation and advances in sciences and arts saw a renewed interest in classical languages by scholars. Words and phrases of Greek and Latin origin entered English. The invention of the printing press had a profound impact on the English language. It was invented by Johannes Gutenberg in Germany in 1450. William Caxton set the first one up in England in 1476. There was a greater need for standardization as the press operator had to decide which words, spelling and grammar to use in the press. The most common form used in printing was the London-centred dialect of English. It was the choice of those with a status in business and society. Some were concerned that English was too chaotic and in need of rules, so they published books detailing correct spelling, grammar and pronunciation. They proved to be very popular. The first English dictionary was published in 1604, containing about 2,500 words. Now, while the language was becoming more standardized, it continued to undergo change through the interactions of people with different regional dialects and accents. Now, Shakespeare, a master of the English language, also invented more than 1,600 words by changing nouns into verbs, joining words together, adding prefixes or suffixes, or simply inventing new words. Here is a passage from his sonnet. Shall I compare thee to a summer's day? Thou art more lovely and more temperate. Rough winds do shake the darling buds of May, and summer's lease hath all too short a date. Sometime too hot the eye of heaven shines, and often is his gold complexion dimmed, and every fair from fair sometimes declines, by chance or nature's changing course untrimmed. But thy eternal summer shall not fade. The key difference between early modern English and modern English is vocabulary. During the 1800s, the Industrial Revolution was in full swing. It was an age of invention, innovation, and change. Technology, science, and industry transformed daily life. Cities grew at a rapid rate. Factories appeared across the English countryside. This created a need for new words to be invented or existing ones modified to describe life in the industrial age. Financial markets started to use words like boom and bust, slump and depression to describe the states of businesses and economies. The British Empire had colonies and interests across the globe in the Americas, Australia, Africa, Asia, and India. Through interaction with indigenous peoples, words were picked up and used in English, the names of animals, foods, housing, and tools. In the 20th century, rapid technological change continued, creating great social and political upheaval. Two devastating world wars, further advances in communication, air travel, ever-increasing commercialization saw slang, jargon, and words for new gadgets and foods incorporated into the language. Today, American English has some interesting differences from British or Australian English. They take out the trash instead of the rubbish. And fall is the season rather than autumn. These are early modern English words that changed in England but have continued on in American English. English is the lingua franca of the 21st century, the universal language for business, entertainment, tourism, technology, international communications, and trade. English has the largest vocabulary of any language. It is incredibly rich and complex. Jan Martel, the author of the novel Life of Pi, remarked, "English is the language in which I best express the subtlety of life." His first language is French, yet he writes in English. He is a Canadian who was born in Spain, and Life of Pi is the story of an Indian boy stranded in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. Now, that's a lot of language influences. Today, the heart and soul of modern English is Anglo-Saxon Old English, with about 5,000 words that have remained unchanged. Words that you and I, and everyone around us, use every day.